Amen. Amen. Okay. Okay. Thank you so much, Rivki, and Boker Tov, Shavua Tov to everyone. Chodesh Tov. We've moved from the month of Adar into the month of Nisan. There's a spirit of renewal and rejuvenation in the air, and we have the privilege to learn together Parshat Vayikra today, which is right the beginning of a new Sefer. The Sefer begins by Vayikra el Moshe, and he called to Moshe, Vaydaber Hashem elav mi'ol moed le'mor. Rashi famously comments on this opening word that when Hashem speaks to Moshe, so then he always spoke to him in a loving fashion with the word Vayikra. Vayikra is the language that the malachim use, that the angels use, because it says, right, V'kara zeh el zeh v'yomar. Kara is a language of love and care and attention. And this is in contrast to the prophet Bilam, to whom Hashem spoke to with the word Vayikar, because the pasuk says in Parshat Balak, Vayikar Elokim El Bilam. Vayikar means that Hashem that connotes more of a happenstance, coincidental, temporary, and so Rashi contrasts the way Hashem, the relationship that Hashem had with Moshe, to the way Hashem has a relationship with all others, or certainly if there's a non-Jewish prophet like Bilam. The Baal HaTurim has a beautiful explanation that many of you have learned in the past, where he says that he points out that there's a small aleph in Vayikra. If you have your Chumash open, you'll notice that the aleph is smaller in font than the other words, than the other letters. This is true in the Chumash, and it's also true in the Sefer Torah. The aleph is small. So the question is, why is the aleph small in the word Vayikra? Rashi doesn't address this point. He just distinguishes between the word Vayikra and Vayikar. But Rav Yaakov Baal HaTurim, in his commentary, says that Moshe hayagadol v'anav v'rotza lichto Vayikar. Moshe, in his humility, he wanted to write the word Vayikar as if Hashem just happened to speak to him, as if there was a lower level relationship between Hashem and Moshe. But Hashem insisted and said, no, we have a beautiful relationship. Our relationship is closer, and Moshe, you're connected to me and have an awareness of me on a totally different realm than all others. And so Hashem insisted and said, no, you have to write the aleph. And to be honest, because I did lovingly call you with the word Vayikra. And so Hashem wants to write Vayikra, Moshe wants to write Vayikar, and they're battling back and forth. And finally, Moshe was forced to write the aleph. But in his humility and modesty, he still wrote the aleph small. So it's Vayikra in deference to the reality and the way Hashem wanted it written. But it's a small aleph because of Moshe's great humility. But perhaps one could offer another explanation of the small aleph, in that we believe very, very much in the aleph. We have faith that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is lovingly involved in this world. We believe that there's Vayikra, that there's love, that there's involvement, that there's a plan and purpose to why things happen in this world. But emotionally, sometimes, right, we're not able to see the aleph. We it seems like there's a lack. We feel the lack of the aleph because at times things seem so coincidental, so happenstance. Where's the love? Where's the connection? Where's the loving hand of Hashem? And so it's a bit of a struggle sometimes to see the aleph. So Moshe wrote a small aleph. He wanted to write the aleph, but perhaps even for Moshe, it was hard to always feel the fullness of the aleph. Yes, there was redemption from Mitzrayim, but 4/5 of the Jews died in the plague of darkness. The tragedy of the Chet Egel, the deaths later of Nadav and Avihu. Moshe spoke to Hashem, but only saw his back. So the small aleph speaks to us about feeling overwhelmed and bewildered in this world. So we know that the aleph is there. We know that Hashem loves every one of us. We know that there's a personal call that Hashem has to us as individuals and as a nation. but it's a struggle to create the aleph. We want lashon chiba, we want the love, but it's hard to see it. We want meaning and fairness. We don't want coincidence and chaos. And so perhaps our job is to turn the word Vayikar into Vayikra, at least with a small aleph, but then to kind of have faith and kind of transform that aleph into a big aleph. Strengthen our faith in Hashem, have confidence that there's schar va'onesh, and to, of course, remind ourselves of all the blessings that we have. And somebody once asked the Kotzker Rebbe, where is God? And the Kotzker answered, wherever you let him in. In other words, the person decides whether the word is Vayikra or Vayikar. Why the small aleph? The Baal HaTurim says it's because of Moshe's humility. Perhaps it's a small aleph because it's very, very hard for us to perceive the aleph. And our responsibility as Jews and human beings is to really highlight and focus on and believe in that small aleph.
Rabbi.
The Parsha continues and says, Daber al b'nei Yisrael v'amarta alehem. Speak to the people of Israel and tell them a new revolutionary idea. Adam ki yakriv mikem karban laHashem. When a person among you brings an offering to Hashem from the cattle or from the flock, shall you bring your offering. Rashi here points out that the word Adam alludes to none other than Adam Harishon, than Adam in Gan Eden. And he says, Ma Adam Harishon lo hikra ben hagezel, just like Adam Harishon did not sacrifice and did not offer offerings to Hashem from stolen goods, shakol hayeshalo, because everything was his. So too, afatem lo takrivu ben hagezel, so too you should not offer to Hashem from stolen goods. This gets into our point that we mentioned last week, which is that the ends do not justify the means, and that it's not just important to do good, but you have to do good and do what's right in the right way. This is one of the commentaries says this is the meaning of the pasuk tzedek tirdo. Either it means that you shall surely pursue tzedek, justice. Justice you shall pursue. Rabbeinu Bechaya says justice, you should seek justice for Jews, and you should also seek justice for non-Jews. This teaches us a very, very important lesson, which is there's a mitzvah to give tzedakah, and there's a mitzvah to take care of Jews, but also to take care of non-Jews. Of course, we have a higher degree of responsibility to mishpacha, to family, to a brother, to a sister. Of course, a family comes first, but there's a responsibility to give tzedakah and take care of all of humanity. Rabbeinu Bechaya said tzedek tirdo, tzedek for Jews, tzedek for non-Jews. But another possible explanation of tzedek tirdof is tzedek, that the justice you pursue should be with a sense of justice. Tzedek. Like when you're involved in a mitzvah, you're involved in a chesed project, and so it's not just important to do chesed, but it's to do chesed in a kind way. It's to do chesed in a way, of course, where you don't get into a fight with somebody else, with a friend, in the process of doing the chesed, right? So chesed should be done with chesed, tzedek should be done with tzedek. And so Rashi says that when talking about karbanos, that it cannot be from stolen goods, and he learns it from Adam Harishon. And the Mefarshim, based on Rashi, say that maybe there's another idea here in Rashi, that Adam was someone who did not take personal responsibility. Adam, after he ate from the tree of knowledge, he blamed everyone else. He blamed Chava. And that's one key lesson of Vayikra, is that one needs to take responsibility and admit sin. And when it comes to a karban, right, it's one of the greatest ideas of Judaism. God doesn't expect any person to be free of sin. But what Hashem does expect is that the person will be strong enough to admit that they fell short, to make penance, and then the forgiveness will come and a new chapter will be opened. Rashi says that Adam is an allusion to Adam Harishon, maybe to show a contrast, that Rashi says it's to show a comparison. Just like Adam didn't use stolen goods, so too we shouldn't use stolen goods. But maybe there's also a contrast. Adam did not take personal responsibility. And our job is, of course, to try our best, try to get it right the first time. But if we don't get it right, so then there's that concept of bringing a carbon to admit our mistake, and to not just say mistakes were made, but to sometimes have the courage to say I made a mistake.
Rabbi.
And the Rav Hirsch, Miriam, if we could hold questions for a little bit.
Yes, of course.
Okay, but I'm so appreciate your presence and your wisdom. But if we could get moving a little bit, and then you could write down your question and you could ask it a little bit later if you don't mind. Rav Hirsch says Adam includes non-Jews. So getting back to Rabbeinu Bechaya's explanation, that all human beings have the ability to bring nidarim nidavot. They could bring sacrifices, which is interesting when you think about it, and a little bit surprising, but it was permitted for a non-Jew to bring a sacrifice in the Beit HaMikdash, at least certain sacrifices, nidarim v'nidavot, kind of like voluntary offerings. This reminds us that there's a universal dimension to Judaism, not just Universal Studios and Jews in Hollywood, but there's a universal dimension to Judaism. And we should try to facilitate for Jews and non-Jews to grow. And that part of our responsibility is not, yes, there are many times we have to be separate from the world around us because we do have different values, but there shouldn't be such a big wall, so it shouldn't be such a big barrier, because a big part of our mission is to take our Torah values and bring them to the world around us. We want to make a Kiddush Hashem for the world. And so Carbonate, the sacrifices, were a path open to non-Jews as well. There were many different kinds of Carbonate. There was obligatory and voluntary. So you have the Karban Chatat, which is a sin offering, which was an obligatory offering in certain situations. Then you had some voluntary offerings. A person can bring an olah, a person can bring a shlamim. You have communal sacrifices, and you have individual sacrifices. So there was obligatory, voluntary, communal, individual. For example, one of the communal offerings that was offered on a daily basis was the olah hatamid. It was offered in the morning and offered in the afternoon. And then you have individual offerings. And there's different kinds of offerings, right? So you have an olah. An olah could be obligatory, it could be voluntary, right? It could be communal, it could be individual. But the concept of an olah is what? It's oleh. It's completely burned on the Mizbeach, which represents complete dedication of our hearts and souls to Hashem. Shlamim is a peace offering. And certain parts of the animal were burned on the altar, certain limbs and fats were burned on the altar, but then it was also eaten by the owner of the offering. And there were certain gifts, of course, given to the Kohanim, because we had to take care of the Kohanim who were running the show. So the Shlamim is a peace offering. Why? Because it promoted peace between us and Hashem, between a person and others. And then you have a Chatat. A Chatat, what's the purpose of a Chatat? That's, of course, atonement or teshuvah for a sin. What's the purpose? What's the purpose of a carbon? And really, Parshat Vayikra, it's Hashem calling to Moshe, and it's now after the building of the Mishkan. And now, what are the Jewish people going to do in the Mishkan? So, what one of the key activities that was in the Mishkan was Carbonate. And Carbonate doesn't resonate too much with us moderns. We're familiar with the service of tefillah, of prayer, which is in place of the Carbonate. There's a misconception that the tefillah only began when Carbonate stopped being brought, but that's not true, because we've always had the concept of a tefillah, and for a long time we've had the concept of Carbonate. And now that we don't have any Carbonate, we don't have any sacrifices in the Beis HaMikdash, so now the only thing we do have is tefillah. But the concept of tefillah and calling out to Hashem and davening on a daily basis is something from the very beginning of time. Tefillah is actually patterned after the Carbonate, right? There was a morning Ola Tatamid, and Shachrit, the Tefillah of Shachrit, is patterned after the morning Karban of the Ola Tatamid. There's a debate between Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis: should you bring the Carbonate Tamid by 4 hours of the day or by Chatzot, and similarly by Shachrit. So preferably a person should daven Shachrit prior to 4 hours of the day, but if you don't daven by 4 hours a day, you could daven until Chatzot, because that machloka between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbana. And then Mincha is parallel to the afternoon Olat HaTamid. Right, there was an Olat HaTamid brought in the afternoon, and so we have Mincha that's parallel to that Karban. Mariv, there was no Karban in the evening. Carbonate were not brought in the evening, but you had the burning of the limbs and the fats of the sacrifices over the course of the evening. That's why Mariv is like on a little bit of a lower level than Shachrit and Mincha. You have repetition of the Shmona Esrei only by Shachrit and Mincha. You don't have it by Mariv. Chazal also teach us that by the Tefillot, Avram established Shachrit, and Yitzchak established Mincha, and Yaakov established Mariv. But the Gemara says that when the rabbis established these Tefillot, they patterned it after the Carbonate. I'll just mention that, so nowadays we don't have the Carbonate, but we have a Tefillah. But also the Tamid, right? We have an Olad HaTamid first thing in the morning. We have an Olad HaTamid last thing in the afternoon. And if you look at the Shulchan Aruch in the Ramah, the very first line of the Ramah has a Tamid, and the very last line of the Ramah in Hilchos Arachayim, that's the laws of daily life. There are 4 volumes of Shulchan Aruch, but in the laws of daily life, the first line includes a Tamid, and the last line includes a Tamid. Did anyone know this? That the very first line of the Ramah, Rav Moshe Isserles in the 1500s, Ashkenazic authority, is Shiviti Hashem L'negdi Tamid. This line is found in many, many shuls in the front, that you should always have the presence of Hashem in front of you. And the presence of Hashem is most deeply felt in the context of the activity of prayer. But Shiviti Hashem L'negdi Tamid, you should always have the presence of Hashem. And the last line of the Ramah is in the context of when there's 2 others. And he talks about, should you have, of course, when there's 2 others, we celebrate Purim in the second Adar. But the Ramah wonders, should a person also celebrate the 14th of Adar and the 15th of Adar in the first Adar, right? When we add an Adar, when you have 2 others. So, of course, Purim is celebrated in the second Adar. But, and in terms of, there's a whole discussion about Yortzites. The Sfardim observe the second Adar. The Ashkenazim observe mainly the first Adar, but the Ramah says you should also best to say Kaddish or light a Yortzeit candle in the second Adar as well. That's if a parent passed away in a regular Adar, and then the question is, when do you observe the Yortzeit in a double Adar? If a person passed away when it was a double Adar, so then you observe the Adar in which the person passed away. But in a case where a person passed away in a regular Adar, and now it's a double Adar, so the Mechaber says that you observe the second one, just like Purim. And the Ramah, Rav Moshe Isserles, says that Ashkenazic custom is to give primacy to the first Adar, because that's the main Adar. Will the real Adar stand up? That's the main Adar, is the first Adar. And so in that context, the Ramah says you celebrate Purim in the second Adar, but in the first Adar, so should a person also be happy, on the 14th and 15th of the first Adar? And the Ramah says, yes. You know what? You should be happy. You don't have to say Tachnan and Shul. Why? Because Tov Leiv Mishteh Tamid. Pasuk and Mishlei, that a person who has a good heart likes to celebrate Tamid regularly. So it's just fascinating to me, something I once learned, that in the Beis Hamikdash, we're about to, we're starting in Vayikra about all the Carbonate. There's an Olad HaTamid in the morning, Olad HaTamid in the afternoon, a regular, constant daily sacrifice. Nowadays, we don't have the Carbonate, but we have these other Tamids that bookend our day. One is faith in Hashem, Shiviti Hashem and Negdi Tamid, and the other one is Tov Lev Mishnah Tamid, that a person should always be happy. And both of those should animate the other. Right? When you serve Hashem, it should be b'simcha. And when you celebrate with your loved ones and you celebrate happy occasions and you're happy, you should always make sure to incorporate a blessing to Hashem. So those are the two tamids that bookend our daily life. So with regards to the Carbonate, even though we don't have the Carbonate, but we have things in place of the Carbonate. We have Tefillah, and we have these messages of Shiviti Hashem and Negdi Tamid and Tov Lev Mishnah Tamid. But there's a whole discussion about the purpose of Carbonate, and how do we understand Carbonate? So many laws and details. It seems to be dissonant with our values. It seems so abrasive. We're like emotionally at odds with the concept of Carbonate. But there's many different ideas that you could learn, and one idea is the concept of admitting a mistake. Another idea is that Vayikra is really a lot about doing what? It's a lot about giving, right? The notion of sacrifice. So, right, it's giving of yourself for other people. It's giving of yourself for Hashem. And each of the Carbonate has a specific message to it, as I alluded to earlier. Each one has a specific. There's so much that we could learn from the Carbonate. But let me bring to your attention again the machloka between the Rambam and the Ramban about Carbonate. Because when you start learning about Carbonate, you have to really at least remind ourselves of this discussion. The Rambam says, my friends, that Carbonate are really a concession to the pagan mindset of the Jew at that time. When they were living in Egypt, they were in a society filled with idolatry and these different rituals. And so the Jews were deeply embedded in this pagan culture. And the Rambam says that really Hashem would have wanted to give Bnei Yisrael the mode of service of meditation and prayer. That's the best way to connect to Hashem, through meditation and prayer. However, because the Jews were, it was kind of part of their culture. This is the culture in which they lived, in which a culture of Carbonate. So that's why Hashem commanded them. It was like a concession to their mindset. It's not the ideal kind of service. And the Carbonate were commanded to Bnei Israel to sublimate, to rechannel, to take those Carbonate that were given to idols and to rechannel it and give those Carbonate to the Borei Olam, to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to Hashem. The Ramban is very, very upset. The Ramban is very, very upset at the Rambam. And the Ramban says that no, that Carbonate are intrinsically important, and it's not just a concession, to our, to the state of the Jewish people in Mitzrayim, but rather the purpose of the Carbon is it's a powerful expression of drawing closer to Hashem. Carbon is not really a sacrifice, but really Carbon is from the word karov. And it's to give of yourself to Hashem in a way that brings you closer to Him. And you have to remember that in those days, one of the key possessions that a person had was an animal. It's almost like, parting with your iPhone. Think about parting with your iPhone now. Be like, wow, I have to part with my iPhone. That's dedication. So in those days, one of the key possessions was the animal. And so giving the animal to Hashem was a really strong demonstration of your willingness to give, to sacrifice for Hashem and for Am Yisrael. And what you would do is you would put your body, you would lean on the animal. You would lean on the animal to kind of show that this animal is being offered to Hashem. In a certain sense, I want to offer myself. I'm willing to offer myself to Hashem. And within the context of that sacrifice, of that offering, so then of course, there's a lot of different ideas. So really, carbon it's not really a gift. It's not a sacrifice. A gift is for the benefit of the person you're giving it to. This is for the benefit of the person bringing it. Carbon is karov, to draw closer and to arrive at a close relationship with Hashem. And in that spirit, so even though it doesn't resonate, but hopefully, that kind of puts it in context of what the Carbonate are getting at. It raises, the Rambam's position. The Rambam, who says that really it was a concession to the Jewish people's level, but really the higher level is prayer and meditation. So now that we don't have Carbonate, so now we have prayer and meditation. So it would seem to follow that when the Beis Hamikdash is rebuilt, there won't be a need for sacrifices anymore, because according to the Rambam, we've already reached the higher level of meditation and prayer. What causes a problem is that the Rambam, when he talks about the rebuilding of the Beis Hamikdash, he says that there's going to be a reinstitution of the sacrificial order. And so you need an hour or two to talk about this. There's a lot of interesting discussion about this. Long story short, the Rambam, even though he felt that it was a concession, the Rambam does not view it as immoral, to bring Carbonate. A person might say, why would Hashem want us to kill an animal in his service? Well, we kill animals for lots of things. Sorry to say it. Many people, you ask them, where things come from. They say from the store, but a lot of times let's say, for food, for clothing, for different reasons, animals have to be treated kindly, compassionately, but an animal can be utilized for the benefit, and is supposed to be utilized for the benefit of a human being. And so if we're comfortable, meaning even a vegetarian, I'm not going to speak for a vegetarian or a vegan person, but I think it's usually, most people assume that it's not immoral, to eat chicken, to have a brisket, certainly stuffed cabbage, or meatballs or whatever it might be, that it's not immoral to have a brisket or chicken. So if for our own personal, pleasures is permitted, so then all the more so it should be permitted to kind of be, to strengthen our relation with Hashem, to show we're willing to give something to Hashem. There's something powerful in that. And so the Rambam, even though the Rambam seems to suggest that prayer is on a higher level than sacrifices is not an immoral kind of service, and therefore once it was instituted, so then it became part of Jewish ritual, according to the Rambam. According to Ramban, yeah, of course there's going to be sacrifices. It's an intrinsic mode of service. Now there are those who say there is a position of Rav Kook that there's going to be sacrifices, but there's not going to be animal offerings. That there's just going to be flour offerings. Flour, not Flower, but Flour, flour offerings, all the different kind of flour offerings, but there's not going to be animal offerings. So I see over here that Ron Cohen put in, Rabbi Cook said there will not be animal sacrifice in the third temple, and Natalie endorses that idea. Okay, so that's a little bit about the sacrifices. I want to allow a little bit of time for questions. We'll start with Miriam.
Rabbi, a way back today, about 3 hours ago, I think, or something, you did mention the plague of darkness. And what I heard you say, and I think my ears did not hear well, which is why I needed to sort of know before we went on whether I heard correctly or not. I heard you say 4/5 of the Jews also died in the plague of darkness. You said that. Now, in my Chumash, it says that the Choshech was for 3 days, but Ulachal b'nei Yisrael haya or b'moshvotehem, and all of Israel had light in their darkness. Now, how and why, or how could have 4/5 of the Jewish people, an enormous amount, how could they have died in the plague of darkness when they were not, according to the Chumash, affected by the darkness?
Great question. The Chumash just says that the plague of darkness only affected the Egyptians. The darkness did not affect the Jewish people. They had light in their homes.
Correct.
But there's nothing in the Chumash about Jews dying during the plague of darkness. But there is a tradition that many Jews, as much as 4/5 of the Jews, died. And they didn't merit redemption. Maybe they didn't want to be redeemed. Maybe they identified with the Egyptians or the Egyptian society, and they didn't merit redemption. And the tradition is that they died during Makas Choshes. So this way, the Egyptians, would not get the wrong idea and would not, would not receive any enjoyment or satisfaction upon the deaths of Jews. So the Jews, will have, it'll be that the Jews died during Makas Choshes, so this way the Egyptians would not become aware of it. Now, Miriam, I always had trouble with that tradition of 4/5 of the Jews not being redeemed. Of course, I hate to hear about any person dying. I hate to hear about any Jew dying. And that's an astonishing number to say 4/5 of the Jews died. But the concept of Jews not participating in the redemption, of Jews not being redeemed, of Jews not joining in the redemption, I never understood that until a few years ago. It occurred to me that it's happening nowadays as well, unfortunately. That and as much as much as we care about all Jews, and we're not being judgmental up against anyone. But right now, we have a state of Israel, which we call Reishet Tzmichat Gulatenu. It's the beginning of the redemption of the Jewish people. And we believe that Israel is the conduit through which the redemption of the Jewish people is going to occur. And Jews are coming back to Israel. And there's like a redemptive process that's beginning. And look, you have, I don't know, is it 4/5 of the Jews? I don't know, is it give or take, that just are clueless. They don't even, they don't have much of a connection to Judaism or Israel. They certainly don't think of Israel as part of the redemptive process. And so it just occurred to me that what happened in Mitzrayim, about 4/5 of the Jews just being out of it, so to speak, sadly, we have a situation nowadays where a lot of Jews are just out of it. So you're right. It's a tough measure to understand, but at least let's see if we can get another question, Miriam. Let's see if we can get a couple more comments. It's a great point, Miriam.
Because just one thing. Because it's a medrash, does that mean I must believe it is fact?
Well,
you stated it, Rabbi. Believe me, I would never criticize you, and I'm not now criticizing you in any way. But you did not say. One of the medrashim says that 4/5 of the Jews, etc. He said 4/5 of the Jews. So I went to look up in the Chumash because I thought I was wrong. And I was hearing something I didn't know, but it does not say it in the Chumash.
Miriam, if it's a medrash, that means it's not found in the Chumash.
Correct.
This medrash does not contradict the Chumash. That's an answer to your question. The Chumash does not say that all the Jews, that nothing bad happened to the Jews during the plague of darkness. It does not say that. What the Chumash says is that there was darkness for the Egyptians, there was light for the Jews. That's all it says. The Medrash, the purpose of the Medrash, take it or leave it with the Medrash. Some Midrashim are true. Some Midrashim are conveyed by the rabbis as not intending to necessarily be true, but to teach a lesson. The medrash, the purpose of the medrash, I don't think a religious traditional Jew needs to believe that every single medrash is true. In terms of it's a bigger discussion about medrash, but I think some midrashim are spoken about and conveyed as that this is a tradition that had happened, but for some reason wasn't included in the Chumash. Sometimes the rabbis are teaching a medrash, but it's not really true. So here's the thing: the purpose of the medrash is not to fill in information. The purpose of the medrash is to teach us a lesson. And so if it's true, then of course you have to learn from it. If it's not true, and the rabbis are teaching it, so you also have to learn a lesson from it. Either way, the purpose of the medrash is really to learn from it. And I think it's okay if you question whether it really happened or not, that's up to you. I think in this medrash, I think this is one of those midrashim where the rabbis are teaching it as something that that this is what happened. But if you don't believe in it, it's you're still a believing Jew and you're still welcome back to the Shiur. And this is not one of the 13 principles of the Rambam. The Rambam says there's 13 principles that every Jew has to believe in. Okay, one of the 13 principles is not that you have to believe that every medrash is true. Yeah, Rifki.
What I was going to say is that actually you're absolutely correct about today's time. But even more so, after the rebuilding of the second Beit HaMikdash, nobody returned. So we don't have a Beit HaMikdash today, so I can understand, not that I understand, but I see that some people, whatever. But after the rebuilding of the second Beit HaMikdash, very, very few people returned. And some of our greatest scholars stayed in wherever they were, Iraq, the Babylonian Gemara, et cetera, they all stayed there. So, and those were great. We had Nevi'im then and all this stuff, and they all stayed. I mean, what was that all about?
Yeah. So, and that's also playing out today as well. So you're right, in terms of Jews not wanting to be part of redemption. We get comfortable in our surroundings. It happened in Mitzrayim, it happened in Bavel, like you're pointing out. And in a certain sense, in a different kind of way, it's happening today. Great point. Jacob, Natalie points out, right? That's true, Natalie, what you wrote. And Jacob and Frida. Hi, Jacob and Frida. Why is the Rambam's explanation of Carbonate as a concession not accepted? I wouldn't say that it's not accepted. I would say that the Rambam is maybe more of a minority view. I would say the mainstream view is probably more of the Ramban, and the kind of like it sounds more compelling, the Ramban, which is that Carbonate has intrinsic importance and is presented as a way for Jews to connect to Hashem. The Rambam is a more of a revolutionary idea. But I'm happy to hear your thoughts.
Right, but I think that was my biggest question, is that seems to be so logical. Maybe it's because all my family are Kohanim and the thought of all that blood and guts would never go well. But I just think that it makes so much sense with the Rambam saying at that time, this is what people did. And then substituting the animals for, don't forget, they were using children and young virgins and everybody else says. So that is so much more logical than animals. And I don't know why. I mean, especially like the Ramban, blasted him for it. Why would that be when it just seems so logical? This is what they did at that time. So this is what Bnei Israel was used to. And then later on, it was just my question. It just seemed to be such a logical explanation to get so much flack for it from other sources.
Yeah. So so you agree with the Rambam, and the Rambam also thought it was very logical, and you're making a compelling case for it as well. So why is the Rambam's explanation not accepted? That's right. It's not accepted by many other commentaries. But I wouldn't say that it was rejected from Jewish thought and philosophy. In other words, the Rambam's position is still something that's learned and certainly incorporated in the conversation, and it does make a lot of sense. But look, if the Ramban was alive today, he would have a very, very strong answer to explain the Ramban. See, the Ramban says it's just hard to believe that these sections of Chumash would be just a concession. And number two,
Right.
He points out that Carbonate, that we see that Adam offered Carbonate, and Noach offered Carbonate, and Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov made offerings. And so that's part of his theory, which
Yes,
tells
and on the
idea that-
other hand, didn't they also daven? I mean, don't we say that Abraham made shacharit and
Yes.
that Yitzchak made? I mean, so
davening always
I
went
mean,
along with it.
I
Davening was
understand
in-
that. I just want to ask you one more thing on what is the whole, I mean, obviously there's a huge import on Korbanot. You have all of Sefer Vayikra, but of the school of thought of Korbanot being some kind of a Kabbalistic. Did you hear of that or no?
That
Something-
Carbonate, there are a lot of Kabbalistic ideas behind Carbonate.
Yeah.
I
Nope.
don't know much. I don't know much about that.
Okay.
But I'm sure there is. But just like there's Kabbalistic ideas behind a lot of the mitzvot and behind a lot of the traditions, I'm sure there's a lot of Kabbalistic ideas behind the Carbonate. I'm not really familiar with that.
Okay.
Okay, Yom Tov, everyone. Shavua Tov, and
Good
Yasher
luck.
Koach for
Thank
the
you.
learning. All the very best. Thank you so much. I enjoyed learning with you. Take care.